What a connection.
Yeah.
Well, hello, everybody. It is Monday, November 25th. It is the week of Thanksgiving if you celebrate. And so happy Thanksgiving to everyone. We are joined today by Frannie Block. Frannie is a reporter for the Free Press. She started her career as a breaking news reporter for the Des Moines Register, where she reported on topics ranging from crime and public safety to food insecurity and the Iowa caucus. And we are delighted to have you with us today, Frannie. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks
And
for having me.
absolutely, I'm looking forward to the conversation. I'm going to have some generational discussion, which is always pertinent and interesting. Deborah, would you like to start us off with the intro to Solid Ground?
Yeah, sure. Solid Ground is a peer support community for anyone concerned about the imposition of critical social justice and or authoritarian measures such as COVID mandates in their workplace, university, children's school, or community. We offer weekly online peer support groups in which members share ideas, thoughts, and support for how to navigate the impact of these ideologies and answer the question, where do we go from here? You can join one of our groups for only $5 a month. To find out how to join our community, please visit solidgroundsupport.com. And please note that Solid Ground does not provide psychotherapy or legal advice, and nothing we do should be construed as such.
Thank you. And hello, Ninja Kitty and Mega Dirk. Let's see, what is that? I don't understand what that comment is. Maybe it's not English. Point Curation, Ray, thanks. Happy Thanksgiving to you too, and the Clue Channel. And doesn't Deborah's haircut look amazing? I just have
We
to
just need
say.
to work on the face on the screen, but we're okay with the hair. Okay,
Oh
it's good.
gosh, I know
No,
that.
you look hot. You look
Yeah,
hot,
you
girl.
do. You do.
Okay.
That book you were just telling us about right before we started
We'll do the
started streaming. Yeah, I want to read that. Face.
Justine Bateman. Okay, can I get that the right way?
Put it right in
I'll
front
go
of you.
on
There
it.
you go. Justine Bateman, Face. I want to read that. That's kind of interesting because as we're all women here, and we're all, we're speaking about generations. There's something really there's something really specific about aging on camera that I think more women are experiencing now that we're seeing ourselves on camera so much. It's such a new phenomenon that, like, if we're talking about generation, Gen X, we didn't have that when we were kids. And so we get introduced to selfies and we're already like, creeping towards midlife. And then suddenly you're on Zoom screens all the time. So it really does something to you. And Franny, you're a lot younger than us, so I don't know what that experience is like for you yet. You have, I think when I was in my 20s, I felt like I was aging, but now I look back and it's just kind of a laugh, like I was still really, I probably peaked at 38, so,
Yeah, I mean, I think social media has a big part to play in that too. It's like the social media algorithm consistently feeds me things that try to tell me that I'm aging. And they're like, buy
Really?
this new
Wow.
serum, or
yeah.
go get Botox, or go to this spa and do this crazy thing and massage your face so you can have better cheekbones. It's like, that's the whole social media sphere. And it's targeting people like me. And I find it very offensive, first of all. But I do think that it's indicative of probably a broader thing that many people my age are experiencing in the age of growing up and growing older with your phone attached at your hip
Oh yeah, that
or in
makes a
front of
lot
your
of
face.
sense. And the other thing is all the ads with like the serums and stuff that I see, they're being used by a woman who's so young that I'm like, oh come on, I don't. This is not convincing. She's at 30 at
She looks
most.
too good.
Yeah, well, she's just a kid. It's like show me an older woman who looks fantastic, and then I'm gonna want to know what she's doing. But it's effortless to have good skin when you're young. So, Deborah, I'll let you take it from here. And you had some things that were really specific. I think that some things that jump out at you from Franny's work, and some themes you wanted to talk about. So, why don't you?
Oh,
why don't you
great.
go with
Thanks.
that?
Yeah, I just want to give a little intro of your work because then we can kind of jump into the generational Gen X, Gen Z discussion. But I just wanted to kind of feature a little bit, Franny, because I think you're, a new crop of journalists, and you chose to be a journalist in a publication that is trying to actually have viewpoint diversity, is independent media. So I guess I want to kind of get a sense of just even your experience, being in the world of independent media, and what is it like being a journalist, at your age, like more or less starting out?
I mean, to be an independent media, to be at the Free Press, I think the best words to describe it are really fun and really liberating. There is no topic that is off limits here. If you want to report it, if you want to find and dig into and expose a truth, it doesn't matter what that truth is. It doesn't matter if it's, politically convenient or inconvenient. It is open for discussion because that is what real dogged journalism should be. And it's really liberating to be at a place like that and to be young and to be supported and just digging into really meaty stories and trying to find wherever my reporting leads me. And that's what I report. So in that sense, it's been great. I will say it's interesting coming up in journalism today. And I think a lot of journalists my age see the industry and see the job kind of like you're an activist in a way. And you kind of have an idea of what you want to report on. And I think it kind of makes sense with journalism and why people want to go into it. It's, you want to give voice to the voiceless. You want to write stories that you feel like aren't being told or being hidden for whatever reason. And so I think it makes sense, like, why someone who, like, I believe in those things as a journalist and as a young journalist, but I do think that it's lended itself, especially in my generation, to a lot of young journalists that see the job as an activist to push forward, not inform the public, but protect the public from scary ideas and make sure to reinforce what your readers want to hear. And I think what's cool about the big bad world of independent media is that that's not necessarily what we're interested in doing. We kind of want to challenge our readers. We want to surprise you guys, and sometimes we want to delight you. Sometimes we want to piss you off. We want you to read things that you don't necessarily agree with, or you think are crazy, or you think, basically that make you want to talk about it. And so it's been really cool to be a part of and watching that be built.
And I also remember when we talked before, just really quick, about it was kind of risky, right? For you, it's like you were at the Des Moines Register, probably your peers, if they're in journalism, they're trying to get in the New York Times or something like that. And so I don't know if you think there's a character trait people might have that they'd be well suited to go, or you could speak to people, take the risk, or I don't know if there's something you could say about that choice and that type of decision people might be wrestling with.
Yeah, it's crazy for me to be able to make a statement like this because I've only been out of college for like 2 years. But I think my whole career thus far has been a series of risks. And I've been very fortunate that so far I think they've all paid off for me. And the first risk, I'll say, was moving to Des Moines, Iowa. So after I graduated college, I'd never been to the state of Iowa before. I did not know a soul in Iowa. And I picked up and I moved because I wanted an opportunity to try journalism. And I do think that a lot of young journalists today, and I get the urge because I wanted this too, they want to get that job at the New York Times straight out the gate once you graduate college. They want to be at the Post or the Wall Street Journal or wherever, the most prestigious position possible, and kind of skip the step where you go to local reporting, which is the way that young journalists used to kind of grow into the industry. And so I'll be honest with you guys, I couldn't get those internships and those fellowships at the New York Times and whatever. I tried. And the opportunity that was presented to me was Des Moines, Iowa, to be a breaking news reporter. And I said, you know what? I'm going to do it. Let's just see what happens. And so that was the first big risk I took. And now whenever I talk to young people interested in going to journalism, I tell them straight up, I say, go local first. I know it seems old school, but that is the best way to learn as a journalist because you're not thinking on a national scale, you're learning on a local scale. And that means that you really get to develop relationships with people and you learn the basics, especially as a breaking news reporter. You learn how to talk to people in really difficult moments in life, how to tell stories that are hard to tell, how to talk to people who don't want to talk to you, like policemen. They might not want to talk to the press. So you got to, learn to get them, willing to open up to you as well. And so there's a lot of different life skills that you can learn from a move like that, and I'm really grateful. The second risk was going to the Free Press. And you're right. I had in my head, like, if I go to the Free Press, I'll never get hired at the New York Times one day. And first of all, the older I get, the more I'm like, maybe I'm okay with that. Media is changing a lot. And I think the Free Press could be the New York Times in 10 years. You don't know. It could be that big of an institution, which would be so cool. But the second thing I've realized is that to be at a place that is, one, something that I really believe in. I believe very strongly in the ideals of this company, and that's very motivating from a work perspective. And the second thing is, it's a lot more fun to be at a place that's growing and has this momentum, and you get to be a core part of building it and contributing to it, and that feels very special. So I think take the risk, even though it's scary, is what I've kind of come to.
Thanks.
I wonder about that sense that there's nothing that's taboo, and about how things will develop, how taboos will develop, because every system, every organization does have its taboos and its parameters and boundaries. And so when something is newer, maybe there's more risk being taken, but over time that tends to develop. And so I'm just kind of curious about that. I think it's just part of human nature and human social psychology that will eventually begin to form. So I'm just sort of curious about that, but I don't know if that's something that you're starting to see yet.
So that's something actually we talk about in the sense that we're very cognizant. And the way I think about it is like audience capture. And that's where you get into a habit of writing something that you know your audience wants to hear. And in the age of the subscriber model, it's really easy to fall into that trap because you want people to continue to pay for your content. Our business model, I think, is different though, in the sense that we assume that our readers actually like to be challenged. I think
Mhm.
there is a vast silent majority of Americans, and we have readers from all over the world, that like to read things that are challenging and difficult and intellectually stimulating as a result for them. And so that is always something at the forefront when I'm thinking about pitching stories, about what stories, how we want to cover certain topics and how we want to bring in a variety of perspectives on really difficult and contentious issues to show people that there are really smart takes and smart people who can have dialogue about these issues on all sides. And so it's something that I think is constantly in my head as a writer when I'm thinking about pitching stories. But I think the fact that it's in my head and in my colleagues' head all the time is the key to avoiding that type of audience capture, is knowing this is a trap and we don't want to fall into it.
Yeah, Jenny, what are your thoughts as a writer?
Well, actually, I have so many thoughts, not necessarily as a writer now, but when I was 25, I worked at the New York Times, and I'm very, very familiar with the kind of old media ecosystem. And similar to what you just said, Franny, I went to a local newspaper, a smaller newspaper market, and worked in Rhode Island for 2 years for the Providence Journal. So I am intimately acquainted with the kind of career projection arc that young journalists are presented with. It's really, really interesting. I mean, I'm very interested in the free press. I actually do think that, before you said this, I thought, this is how I perceive the free press now, is a kind of up and coming New York Times replacement. I genuinely feel that way. I feel like they have um, you guys will have the wherewithal to develop into something that has that type of bench, that deep bench. And it's kind of like a leader in the independent media, obviously. Um, but when I was 20, I think I was like 23 when I got hired as a news clerk on the Metro desk at the New York Times. And it was
Mhm.
my first job out of college. I had briefly had another job for a few months, and then it was my first job out of college. And so it wasn't a staff reporter, because that was kind of closed off. I mean, you obviously you had to have had a lot of experience, but it was a newsroom job, and it was a
Mhm.
very new job. And so I was working with the editors, and I was writing stories, and I got all these clips from the Times. I was there for 9/11. I was there for the
Wow.
JFK Jr. falling out
Wow.
of the sky. Obviously,
Wow.
9/11 was a
Wow.
bigger story,
Oh
but
my gosh.
yeah, we were on Metro. It was insane. It was the most insane experience of my life. It was also probably the best job I've ever had. But it was funny because it was like you were saying, this sense of like freedom that you have at the Free Press, that wouldn't have been what the Times was like, because you were going in with this reverence for this very vaunted institution. And as a young
Mm.
person, you were like, okay, well, I'm here to learn. I'm here to sit and watch my elders. And there's a strict hierarchy. It was still in that old world. So and I learned an incredible amount. The people I worked with were incredibly professional. They were incredibly devoted to their job, almost like monk level. I had an assignment editor who told me, I was there one day on election day. It happened many times. And I asked him, had he gone to vote that day? And he looked at me like I was crazy, like I was an idiot. And he said, no, I don't vote. I can't vote. This because of the job that I do. I mean, that's how seriously they took objectivity
Wow.
back then.
Mm.
Um, and so, you really, you had to prove yourself before anyone would give you any attention, before anyone would say please and thank you. You were there silently working away in the background until someone decided, okay, maybe this kid's worth a punt. And it's funny to see, and especially when Barry Weiss's experience leaving the Times and the newsroom activism that was coming to light and has been exposed by many different people at this point, it was genuinely kind of upsetting to me, like emotionally upsetting. Like, what happened to
Mm.
these people? What happened to this professional, um, absolutely rigid uh, institutional setup that maintained this firewall between opinion and personal feelings and their job? I mean, that seems to have vanished. And I'm so happy to hear that there's people like there are still young people. I mean, maybe it's just you, but I'm sure there's a couple more that you can think
No,
of.
there's a bunch of us. There
Yeah,
Well,
at the Free Press.
they're
We're run by
cultivating
Gen
them,
Z.
right? Yeah. Well,
yeah,
aren't they also at the Free Press purposely bringing in people in their 20s, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah.
seeking them.
But I mean,
I think so.
like,
I mean,
the fact that you did the smart thing and you went to Des Moines. I mean, the impression that I was getting from the outside reporting of places like the Times was these young people thought they were too good for that, and you were absolutely spot on. They're 100% activists. They all want to be the hero of the story. They're incredibly immature. They're not very. They don't have the depth, and they're not smart enough to realize their own insignificance. And so they come along with these notions of grandeur, like I'm going to save Black people, or I'm going to save this, that, or the other, and they try to apply that to their work. And they've misread the brief. Like, that is not what. Well, they haven't actually, because it turns out the system is set up to accommodate them now. But back in the day, that was not ever going to happen. And going to the local papers is the best education you can have, not just to be a journalist, but to be a writer of any kind, to be any
yeah.
other job that you want that involves dealing with people going forward. Therapist, lawyer, anything at all. Going to those incredibly boring zoning board meetings and doing those caucuses,
They could
and
get spicy, you know?
yes,
This day and
I mean,
age,
maybe
they do,
actually my
right?
time is
Yeah.
pretty boring. But people get really upset over zoning laws. They get very upset
Oh,
over
yeah.
signage. Okay, like
I
the worst part
published
I
a
ever had to
very
do.
powerful series
Oh, crazy!
from the
Yeah, no, I
zoning
mean,
board meeting.
just yeah, it means a lot, right? So it's an education in life. It's an incredible thing, and it changed my perspective on how everything works. And that's absolutely what all young people should be doing, is going to places where they're not the star of the show, they're not the center of
Mm.
attention, because that's not the
Yeah.
point. You have to, in order to be a writer of any kind, you kind of have to get yourself out of the way first.
I love the way you framed that too, because when I think about going to the Des Moines Register and living in Iowa, um, I think it really did set me up to succeed at the Free Press in so many respects. But one of the big ones is simply just the fact that I talked to so many people that otherwise in my life I never would have met, I never would have gotten to know, I never would have gotten to understand, I never would have interacted with. And, for example, I was during a time when I was in Iowa, I was reporting on Nikki Haley's presidential campaign during the caucus, and I was traveling to cities across the entire state, east, west, rural, more urban, everywhere in between. I went to political rallies and vintage car shops. Like I was all over the place. And it was awesome because I learned honestly to be a better and more empathetic person through that process, getting to
Yeah.
know people, understanding where they're coming from, asking them, for example, why do you feel this way about this issue? Tell me about what this means to you. And those are interactions that were so critical to just teaching me about human nature and other human beings and what their needs are and experiences are.
Yeah, and it really shatters assumptions. You think,
Yeah.
I think all people, and especially young people, but all people carry around with them a set of assumptions because of things that they have picked up, from the media, but, just from life. And you walk in and you meet, oh, actual real people who don't conform to your assumptions. And that is better than any college education. It really is such an important life milestone, never mind a professional one. It's true
Hmm.
diversity.
Absolutely.
Well, and there, Jenny, you recently had some observations about how Gen X influenced maybe the outcome of the last presidential election, the current cycle we're in. And I think that there's differences in sort of human development over the lifespan, as you're pointing out. Like this is something that tends to be a thing with young people, but also there's generational differences in terms of what we've been exposed to, what eras we've lived through, and sort of the zeitgeist of that era. And I'm really curious about your thoughts, Jenny, and also, well, everybody's thoughts and Franny's thoughts about how these are playing out.
Well, I was very surprised when I read that Gen X had gone 54% for Trump. I was shocked. I was not expecting that. And in fact, earlier this year, Leslie Benjamin and I had this conversation on his show, where we both kind of like resigned ourselves to like Gen X being just this sort of non-entity and just kind of staying silent and in the background because we were too like we wouldn't join any club that would have us kind of thing. And so I was genuinely shocked by this. Everyone I know from my youth, none of them switched like I did. Um, but then I thought about it for like 2 seconds, and it only took me 2 seconds to think, wait, okay, what is it about the age, kids who were growing up in the 80s in particular. And I just started thinking about all the movies we watched, and I was like, wait, we were literally programmed to hate the government from like the earliest of ages. All of our pop culture phenomena were rebellious, anti-establishment, anti-government in particular. And I thought specifically of E.T. and Firestarter, which two movies I loved
Mm.
when I was little. Everyone said I looked like Drew Barrymore, and I just loved her. I thought she was like a family member or something. And E.T. and Firestarter both like terrorized me. Like that the government agents taking E.T. away as he's dying and not giving him care, and then the Firestarter. You probably don't even know what. I know you know E.T. Franny, but like so Firestarter. She is a Stephen King novel, and Drew Barrymore is like 8, and she starts fires like with her mind, and the government
Oh
comes to
boy.
take her and like shoots her with a stun gun and like steals her from her father. And I'm like, ah! Like,
That
so
theme
like
was so present because Splash was like that too. Do you guys remember Splash? That was my
that's right.
favorite
That's another
movie
one.
when I was a
It's
kid.
Another one.
I'm thinking like the boomers had like Kent State, and then we had
We had
E.T.
the
Right.
mermaid being
and
stolen.
the mermaid.
Mermaid and the alien and the pyro, the weird little pyro girl. Anyway, so it was like, and then it just kind of grew from that. And we were always this sort of like chip on our shoulder, sort of outsiders. That's how it felt growing up. That's how I always felt personally myself. How much of that was internally, my own emotional dysregulation, or how much of it was I was picking up from culture? Who's to say? That's an interesting question in of itself. Like, how much does our generation influence us? I happen to think it influences us a lot. So then when I finally sat down, I was like, actually, no, Gen X is the perfect Trump supporting group. And then I was like, wait, actually, a lot of his key figures that helped him get elected are Gen Xers. And it all kind of made sense. And the interesting thing about it was I wrote this piece in like an hour and 20 minutes or something. And I just put it up on Substack. And like an avalanche of comments from people who hadn't already subscribed to me. This thing had like organic reach. It was just spread through Substack. I think I'm up to like 500 likes or something, like several hundred comments from people who didn't follow me before. Just like, oh my God, like people were like, all these Gen Xers were appearing out of the woodwork, just like ferociously being like, yes, we're so sick of this shit. We are sick of the millennials and the boomers. And so I also think that Gen X and Gen Z have much more of an affinity with each other, and millennials and boomers less so. That's my thesis.
It's so interesting you bring that up too, because my colleague Peter Savodnik just did an interview with Justine Bateman, who I think is like the face of Gen X for Trump now, in
Yes.
some way. And you know, Deborah, I know you just held up her book when we started this conversation, but I do think she is kind of this embodiment of a movement of Gen Xers. Now, I'm not speaking from a place of authority on this, full disclosure, but you know, in the interview she talked about how we're done, kind of, we being Gen X are done silencing ourselves. We want to talk, we want to speak our mind. That's what we were kind of born and raised to do, and that's now what we're going to do. And I think that has some of that spunky punk rock energy in it that contributed to part of this shift.
You know, I wonder how much. So the whole like this idea of Gen X, right? This sort of, and boomers seems to have evolved relatively recently, where we have this way of talking about people in terms of what generation they're from. I didn't know what Gen X was until a couple of years ago. I didn't know what that meant. I knew that I was from a certain time in the world's timeline, but that, you know, I'd always be like, and I just asked you guys before we started recording, like, when did that start? What's Gen X? What is this? 1965 to what? 1980 or something?
80.
And then the next one is millennial, which is 1980 to, or 81 to 98 or something, 99. And
96,
then,
95,
96.
okay. Okay. And then Z, and then now alpha, right? And I
yeah.
have to wonder, just like thinking about what is happening where we see each other in this sort of generational taxonomy. And I wonder if a lot of that is due to cohort-based schooling, where we really tighten down on how old your peers are. Everybody's in this tight little group of same age peers as they move through school, and smaller family sizes, and more relocations of families. So you're not growing up with this vast network of cousins and people who are sort of stepwise age similar to you, but a little bit offset. So if we grew up in big families where you had 8 siblings, you know, you're somebody being 5 years older than you wouldn't seem like a really big deal. In fact, somebody being 12 years older than you would just be a normal thing to have relationships that were really close with people of all these different ages. But now with these small family sizes, we've got basically like kid, parents, you know, and then same age cohort. And so I wonder how much sort of personality and cultural drift is occurring within these more tightly subsetted populations. I guess I just wonder, like, on an evolutionary sort of social psychology scheme, what is really happening with us that we're segregating more and more and experiencing things in an atomized way according to our linear age.
Well, I do also wonder the relationship of each technology that's rolled out to, if there's certain things that are, I get what you're saying too, because if you're not having multi-generational relating, then the sorting happens. But I also wonder with the advent of each sort of technological thing, if that also isn't in some way, you know, making these worldviews a little different. I don't know.
Yeah,
I
97
think that
cents comes up with this. This is just a quick note. 97 cents. I think it's just the opposite, Leslie. Baby boomers were literally defined by being such an enormously sized generation. Right, that is a good point. Go ahead, Jenny.
I think, I mean, I have a funny like I've sort of two minds about generational categories, because I can see how they can be really overplayed and they become trite, and it's like kind of cringe and like, oh, my generation, and like, I was so special, we were amazing. Um, I get it, and I see it on Instagram all the time, like these reels done by other Gen Xers of like how hard and tough we are, and I'm always like kind of mortified by it. Um, but having said that, there is something that we share generation to generation. And I personally, like, I grew up in 3 countries. I grew up in the US until I was 10, Italy until I was 15, and then Northern Ireland, Ireland, United Kingdom in my later teens. That's where I finished high school. And the kids I was friends with in 3 different countries, um, we all have this kind of the same thing, and I've been struggling to put my finger on like what the word is other than like vibe or I there's some I feel like I need to dig a little deeper because there's a certain affinity and a certain kind of like worldview that even like my friend who grew up in a little Italian village and my friend who grew up in Belfast and my friend who grew up in like upstate New York, it kind of it's general amongst the people of this age. And I I think a lot of it comes from pop culture. I think a lot of it comes from film and music. Like remember how much bands were like the everything. But I've heard people talk about how kids these days, younger people don't identify themselves with bands as much as we used to, and they're developing and evolving other identities that replace
We just
that.
identify with Taylor Swift, basically.
Yes.
That's
And
true.
your little bracelet. Yeah.
That's it. That's it. That's
Well,
it.
The
that's
uni
fine.
band.
Go
get
Taylor.
Yeah, that's good. Uniband. Yeah.
But I wonder, was it that shaped us? And then if it was the music that shaped us, then who was shaping the music? So it's like I feel like there's layers to this that you can deal with in a very superficial level, and sort of like, oh, bloody kids, we were so much better than they were. But there is more to it than that, and I'm interested in it because because the experience of childhood and youth has changed so much from what I can tell.
One of the things when I went back to graduate school after a long time away from academia, I went to college later. I was in my mid-20s when I started college, and then I was in my early 30s when I finished and went to law school. And then I took this long break of about a decade off, and I went back to a graduate program. And this is where I encountered the critical social justice model really heavily in a graduate clinical mental health counseling program. And we were being taught according to critical race theory and these racial and gender models that just made absolutely no sense to me. And as I looked around, I saw a lot of the people in the room agreeing with it or not having any problem with it, at least being able to speak this kind of language that we all know now. We all hear these cliches and phrases that are part of the water we're swimming in, but for me they were very alien. And one of the things that I started to sort of take apart was, wow, this has been creeping up in education for a while. Like these younger people, the people that are about 10 years younger than me, this is not new to them. This is something that they've been kind of systematically exposed to over time in a way that it's becoming normal for them. And so that's very interesting to me. The people who are about your age, Frannie, and maybe a couple years older, will have really grown up with a lot of this. And I wonder about, when Jenny, you're talking about that sort of rebellious instinct, how much of that is our generation, how much of that is our innate sense of self. I almost felt like defensive when you were talking, like, no, that is me. I am that. It's not my generation. That's me. Yeah. And that's funny, isn't it? Isn't that so interesting? What does that say about an individual and what is genuinely authentically you, and nature versus nurture, really? But something I've thought many times is, is there some innate rebellion in people, and when are the younger generations going to start rebelling against the sort of authoritarian feeding you opinions that's happening right now, this really heavy-handed moralizing that is being taught? So I'm really curious about a perspective of someone who's been through that.
Well, I think in some ways, I think I see that kind of rebellion already happening. But then sometimes I go back on Instagram and I look at Instagram stories from people I went to college with, and I go, oh, maybe I'm just kind of in this free press bubble a little bit, where the people around me, the young people around me now at work, because we do have a lot of really cool Gen Z people who work at the free press. I think I'm a little bit, it's changed my perspective, but I'm not sure if that's reflective of broader Gen Z or not. What I will say that's really interesting about what Gen Z has gone through, and I think you're seeing this in gender specifically, women in Gen Z politically are trending much, much further to the left. and men and Gen Z are trending much, much further to the right. And I think we are seeing a world in which that kind of the strict moral codes have segmented and separated us so much that now people within the same generation who are just of different genders are seeing the world in entirely different ways and moralizing the world in entirely different ways as well. And I think that's actually inevitably going to be such a serious problem that something drastic will have to happen to kind of say we have to reset a little bit.
Yeah.
The
Yeah, I
idea of
think
the
some people
bubble
are
is
concerned
interesting.
about that, especially the natalists. The pro-natalists are freaked about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting too. I mean, the antinatal and pronatal divide. That seems to, this word pronatalism, it's so weird. It used to just be normal, right? Like just people generally expect to grow up, get married, and have kids. And now there's a lot of messaging against that. I wonder how much that's being uptaken by younger people. I mean, my mother was 20 when I was born. And so she was born in what, 1960, no, 55. She was born in 1955. And then I was born in 1976. She was like 20 and a half, I think. And she had her last baby at 26. And that was a good age to have your last baby. That was a good, because your fertility really peaks around 21, 22 years old. You're at your best. That's the best time to have a baby for your body and for your body's recovery and for your health. If you've had a baby between the ages of 17 and 22, I think, are for a female's body. And now we see women putting off childbirth till much, much later. And 26 being that's pretty early. You're still in your 20s. You're
That's
gonna have
young
a baby.
now.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. I think
Well,
I
I
have this bad
recently got
habit. Sorry,
engaged,
go ahead.
actually.
Oh,
Sorry.
congratulations.
I was saying, thank you. I recently got engaged, and the reason I bring it up is only because I'm 25, and everyone is like, "You're so young," and it's true. I'm actually, I think, the first of my friends to get engaged,
Wow.
probably by many, many years.
Yeah. Well, congratulations. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
It's funny because I was always told growing up, like, don't have children too young, don't have children too young. My mother would have been 27 or 28 when she had me, which is young by now, it's today's standards, but older than Leslie's mom and same, demographic, but or same generation. And I was always like told, don't have children until you're in your 30s, until you're this, that, and the other. And, if my son had a baby, or he's a boy, that if he ended up in his relationship with a child at a young, barely out of his teens, I would not have a problem with that. Assuming all things were good, I'd be like, that's fine. Well, that's fine. I've gone so the other direction in terms of, I think there's a lot of loneliness and a lot of like lack of family togetherness that needs to be kind of remediated generally. So if that were to happen because I have a very my mother's family is huge. My mother's one of 10 children. So you just see that literally the demographic
Yeah.
collapse going on literally in my own personal life, from 10 children, none of her siblings had more than 4. Only one had 4, and a couple only had 1, and I only had 1. And, this lack of sort of people around you. And I'm lucky that I still have my aunts and uncles who, are, getting old now, but they're still there, most of them. But, I think of my son, like, when he's in, there's not that many people around. And it's fun growing up in a large family with lots of cousins, because that's what I did as a kid. I had a lot of cousins, and a lot of my aunts and uncles were young when I was a little kid. So I was hanging around with all these young stoned hippies all the time, because, and every Sunday, my grandparents were very traditional Catholics. Their younger kids were these stoned, long-haired hippies, and we would all like run around playing, and it was really nice. Actually, I have very fond memories of that in the early 80s. And if that made a comeback, I wouldn't be upset in my own life.
Now I want to go in a slightly different direction because I realized, well, let's see. So what year were you born? 1999? Is she frozen?
Yeah, she's a little frozen.
know if you can hear us.
Sorry, guys. I was born in 1999.
9999. Well, I find so you're literally maybe the ones that are born a little earlier. I hear from younger people this thing of growing up in a time like we had sort of this heyday of the United States and the condition it was in. And a lot of them are going like, I came in and there was 9/11, maybe I was a baby, but then there was the Iraq War, then there was the crash, then there was, I mean, just all these things. And so their sort of frame is like, things seem disruptive and more unstable and like these wars and all of this stuff. And so I just feel like the frame that people your age have about things is so different from all of us who have had a much longer arc. And so it does feel like it could be very different worlds in some sense. I mean, there's always, I guess, different worlds, but for some reason it seems particularly stark given the things you guys kind of entered in on versus the like runway we had before that.
I wonder too if that in any
So we have a little bit of
anti-Americanism that I think my generation's. Oh, I'm so sorry.
You're back. You're back. It's
fine.
a
Can
little
you guys hear
glitchy.
me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So sorry. I mean, I was saying, I wonder if that has contributed in any way to the sense of kind of anti-Americanism in my generation, talking about, things that I think if another generation were to step into a conversation of Gen Z kids, it's not uncommon for people to be like,
Oops.
ugh, I want to get out of America. It's the worst. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay. It's part of the
Come back
internet
then.
age.
Yes.
Part of it never works when you need it to. Isn't that the case?
That's
Mhm.
true.
Anyway, I was just saying that I do think that my generation, a lot of people love to bash America, and there is, for lack of a better way to say it, a lack of patriotism among people my age that I think has also been reflected in some of the more kind of extreme politics you might see on college campuses these days. I think is rooted in that sense that people think America is the beacon of all that is bad versus maybe older generations see America as fighting for what's good and what's right.
Yeah. I have a lot of thoughts on that actually. I think that's absolutely correct. But I think what happened with younger people, it was starting to happen when we were young, but it's snowballed. I think your generation more than any other was overloaded with information that you did not need as part of your childhoods.
Mm.
And that, media saturation is part of it. And also this idea that adults should talk to children about, worldly things. I mean, that's why there's a certain, it's not cynicism exactly, but like a certain sourness and like negativity because you guys from a very young age were literally burdened by, this drumbeat that was like every airport lounge, every back of the taxi, never mind your parents probably talked about it, which is fair enough. Your schools were talking about it. People talk, that's fine. But it was just kind of like this incessant noise of these very adult things that fundamentally, like, the Iraq War, unless your family was fighting it, the Iraq War probably didn't have that much of an impact, certainly on the homeland, like the American homeland, like World War II would have done, or would have had wars to more directly impact countries that are close by to the actual theater of war, and if you think back to older generations, I mean, my grandparents, they were dealing with World War II, and then people before that were dealing with World War One, much more serious, much more direct impact, much heavier, kind of weighty war. Yet they went into it with rather chipper attitude, and part of that, yes, is this sort of the expansion of like basic left wing values that's become the norm now, especially in like educated American circles. But it's also this sense of we did this terrible thing to children, was that we adultified them by talking to them about this stuff when they didn't need to know about it. Just let kids like run around and play in the dirt. Like they're going to be fine if you just let them age appropriately and don't give them all of this sense of like what the world is, and it kind of, it's almost got this repellent effect. And I don't blame even the craziest like TikTokers, the craziest left-wing TikTokers, that the young ones, I don't blame them, because that was literally molded. They were molded that way by the society that got parenting completely ass backwards and said, "Oh
Backwards
yeah,
is
let's
right.
dump all this crap on these little kids."
I would say that it's not just that they were given too much information; they were given too little opportunity for experience. So
Yeah.
you have this strange combination of overloading the cognitive processes and the information dumping, while giving too little freedom for actual experience. And I think some of that also is a result of greater perception of threat, greater, sort of threat salience through more. The nightly news became this place where you learned about horrors that were going on everywhere. So people tightened up on letting their children play outside. You started to leave kids in the house. If you're home alone, and you're home alone a lot more because mom's working and dad's working, or mom and dad are divorced, and so you're home and the TV is your sitter. And so now you're getting info dumped on, and you're watching HBO, or you're watching whatever really adult stuff going on, while you yourself are having. I think we lost Franny. She'll probably be back. Maybe her connection will be back in a second. But that is so interesting to me, that what effects that might have on a population, and I think we're seeing some of that right now.
Demoralization.
What did you say?
It's demoralization.
Demoralization.
And
Well,
I think also, if you give that
Go ahead.
information to someone who's so young, who has no agency,
No
you're a
agency.
child. So if you
Yes.
tell an adult they have some agency, they feel I can do things in the world, it's like, it's still scary, but you're like, if you're like 5 and you're just little and they're telling you these things and you're like, I can't even do it. I mean, it's just got to be more scary.
100%.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's a recipe for learned helplessness and the sense of anomy, which, is like this lostness. I can mean nothing. What can I ever produce or contribute that is meaningful?
Or I have to
And
be an activist at age 5.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
But Leslie, you're so right. Taking away children's freedom to experience each other and experience unsupervised interaction and unsupervised play is probably the worst thing. That's like, I mean, short of having to go down a coal mine, I think that's one of the worst, most destructive things you can do to a child. Over engineer their lives and mind invasion.
Yeah.
And that definitely is how millennials and Gen Z were raised. Sorry, we're just talking about you.
I
Well,
just want to give a quick example
yeah.
really fast, because on this two-way program, I watch people come in and they have the audience participate. And one man who was a Harris voter came on and he said, gosh, I just don't know what to do. Harris lost, and now my child came to me crying that Trump is president because he's going to not do anything for the client. What do I do? And we're thinking, you shouldn't have told your kid and freaked them out about all this stuff. That's why your child is coming and crying to you. So anyway, that was just a practical
Yeah.
example.
Oh, Jennifer's muted. Let's unmute Jennifer. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's like, let your kids have a childhood. They have the rest of their life to worry about things like that. I think it's just it's adultifying kids. I really disagree with it. In terms of the whole thing with all the structured time with kids, something that happened when my stepkids were young that really ticked me off. The school sent home notices to the parents that the kids during recess could no longer make up their own games.
What?
Yes, I
Oh
shit
my
you not.
God.
Why? Because it was causing arguments. But that's all part of it. You
That's
argue, you
You're
negotiate,
supposed to learn through
right?
that.
That's right. But they
Unbelievable.
wanted them to play only recognizable games so that if there was a dispute, the teachers knew the rules of the game and they could step in and say, well, this is the right way. I just thought, my gosh, that is just a boot coming down on creativity.
That's
That is
incredible.
That's so
horrifying.
sad.
It is. It is really sad.
When my daughters were in elementary school, we were told that we had to have on file with the school, we had to have a pick up and drop off plan. The child was never allowed to leave the campus without an adult. So I was like, my plan is my daughter walks home from school. And they said, no, the kids are not allowed to walk home from school alone. They need to be picked up by an adult every time. And so then you had to sign them up for some kind of YMCA after school thing if you wanted to leave your child. If you couldn't be there right at the bell to pick your kid up, you had to put them in a supervised activity. This was astounding to me. And what you're saying, Jennifer, that's disgusting. I mean, it's just so horrible. You're robbing kids of the ability to get experiential learning that they need. Like, what are they?
That's right.
Then how do you expect them to get married and have a family when they're in their 20s? They're not ready. They need another 10 years of experience before they know how to be an adult at this point.
That's right.
Oh, it makes
Did
me
you
so
guys see
angry.
the case in Georgia?
Everything's structured.
Frannie, the Georgia case, is this the one where the woman had she is arrested?
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us about it.
The woman was arrested. A mom in Georgia was arrested because her son was found by police walking to the local store. They live in like a more rural area, and he was walking on the main road to the local store, and police picked him up and brought him home and then arrested the mom for letting him walk to the store by himself.
Right.
And they charged her with like endangerment or something like that.
When I was his age, I was babysitting a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I was babysitting like days a week. I was 10, I got my first babysitting jobs, 9, 10 years old. By 12, you're full on. You're like, you could be somebody's nanny if you needed extra money. And people had paper routes,
Yeah.
we had a totally different perspective on childhood.
Totally.
And I think it was tightening before I was a kid too. I think it tightened down a lot when I was a kid. There was so much more heavy supervision. It's really interesting. Jenny, you were going to say something. I cut you off.
I was just going to say, like, the thing about telling children what they can and can't play, that really enrages me. I find that to be abusive, actually. It's mind invasion. It's the worst kind of just control freakery. And I was going to tell like a funny anecdote. Literally one of my most triumphant moments of my life to this day, okay, and I'm about to turn 49 years old, was when I was in fourth grade in Brooklyn on a playground, and I successfully like triumphed in a conflict with the boys who we were playing jump rope, and they got in our grill, and they were trying to take our rope, and they were fighting with us. And I had this stroke of genius where I gave the one end of the rope to one girl, and I walked around. They were all standing in a group, like heckling us and just being horrible. And I came around and we pulled the rope, and they all fell over like this. To this day, I have never felt so satisfied in my entire life as I did that day in the playground in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, when I was 8 years old. And like children are being deprived of that opportunity if they're not allowed to make up their own damn games.
That's hilarious.
I love it.
Well, I grew up fairly poor, and I didn't go to college right away. It was just not something that was really. My parents were college educated. My mom graduated college the same year I graduated high school, but they didn't have the money to put me in college. And they were busy, and they got divorced about that time. And so it was kind of like I just sort of fell through the cracks. Nobody knew. I didn't know how to go to college. How does one go to college? I don't know. I went and stood around at the community college in a bunch of different lines one day, couldn't figure it out, took a bunch of entrance exams, and then didn't know how to register. So I went home and just went back to work. So I didn't start college for a few years. And when I was in my mid-20s and I had 2 little kids, I met the woman who became my best friend and still is many years later. And she was 5 years older than me, and she had kids the same age as my kids. She had spent her late teens, early 20s at university. And hearing her experience, I sort of had this combination of envy that I didn't get to do that, and also discussed that there was this prolonged adolescence that so many people were experiencing, where they were still being supported by their parents and enabled to live this really free, sort of weirdly bohemian hippie, hedonistic life. They're drinking, they're having lots of sex, they're partying. And meanwhile, I'm working and raising kids. It doesn't sound terrible. It sounds fun, but it sounds like crazily hedonistic. And like, in what universe are you entitled to those years of hedonism as a young adult? what in the world is happening when people are allowed to just behave that way? And then when I was in college myself, I was in university in my late 20s, early 30s, and I was easily, I graduated summa cum laude. I had the highest GPA in my graduating class. This was it was a result of a lot of work, but I was a big fish in a small pond because I was around a bunch of people who were stoned all the time, not paying any attention, playing computer games, looking at Facebook, which was a big thing back then. If I sat in the back of the classroom, everybody's laptop was up shopping or looking at Facebook. So it didn't feel like this tremendous accomplishment to be the smartest kid, you know? I wasn't a kid. It just kind of shocked me that we were prolonging adolescence in this way. And these kids didn't take it very seriously because their parents were all paying for it. They didn't care. Meanwhile, I'm working for it. So I don't know. I had a point. I lost my point and I just went on a rant.
Interesting.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, you made me think of some of the reporting I've done. You know, one of the first stories I wrote for the Free Press was about something going on at Stanford University and about how administrators were making.
Oops.
Yeah, we have a glitchy feed from Frannie, unfortunately. I really want to hear the story. Why don't does anybody else have an observation? We'll wait for Frannie to pop back up.
Yeah, I think this idea that children are entitled to go to college and they must go to college, and it doesn't matter the debt and you're just going to party. That's also disastrous to young people's mental health. Young people need challenges, not had to have everything handed to them. You desperately need challenges.
If Frannie, you were saying, do we have you?
We have a Frannie, I think.
We see you.
Oh, yeah, this feed
yes.
is bad. Well, you know what? We're going to have to see if we can have another time for Frannie, because I'm really enjoying this conversation with you. I'm enjoying your observations and perspectives, and we just have an unfortunate glitchy... Yep, she popped off again. So we have just a bad connection. We're going to have to
I wanted to hear her story about
Let's see if we
Stanford.
can wrangle her again. Yeah,
I know.
I do think people would be much better if they're going to go to university, to go when they're older, when they're mature, when they're actually they want to learn, and like that would make so much more sense. Have them go have like internships, apprenticeships, get work experience before they do it. There she is.
Somebody put a funny comment. Did you see that? Kamala is trying to silence Frannie.
I'm back. You can blame the Wi-Fi here. I was not
Okay.
informed the Wi-Fi was so bad when I stepped in here. I'm so sorry.
Oh gosh, it happens. It happens. It's really annoying sometimes. But I was just saying we should schedule a time to have you back on when you have a better feed so we can get more of your observations and thoughts if you're up for it. We'd love to have a part 2. Maybe
Yes,
maybe
would love
in
to.
the new year. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
You can be our resident young person.
Yes.
I'll bring you all the insights from Gen
Z in the
anytime
house.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have to be. Wasn't like Lena Dunham in Girls was like, I am the voice of my generation, and then it was like, well, I'm a voice of my generation, and it's like I'm a
Yes.
voice.
Oh, that's
You
awesome.
can be a voice of your generation.
Well, gosh. So,
I am by no means an expert, but a voice for sure.
Frannie, while we have a decent enough feed, why don't you? What are your thoughts? Do you have anything that we didn't get to that you wish we had? What's on your mind coming up in the future? What are you looking forward to? Just send us off with some general Frannie thoughts.
Okay, general thoughts. I mean, I'm really looking forward to, I don't know, I mean, personally at the Free Press, digging into some more long form projects, hopefully coming up soon. Trying to try out different mediums too, video, audio, bringing journalism to people kind of where they're at. So personally, that's something I'm really excited about. And then in terms of society and the world, I don't know. I feel like we're entering into an era actually where having conversations out in the open again and engaging on meaty, difficult topics is cool. I think free speech is going to be cool again. Or
Oh,
Yeah.
well, that
I
was a good way to end it.
Yeah.
That was like a perfect way to end it. That
I
was
think so.
perfect.
I think it really was. And everybody, I will put links to Franny's work in the description for this video. So go check her out. And thank you so much for joining us today, everybody in the chat and ladies here. It's been great to see you, and I hope everybody has a wonderful Thanksgiving. And Jenny, are you doing anything on Thanksgiving? Do you do any kind of like token American thing?
I tried to, one year I did, and doing it on Sunday just isn't the same. It's not
No.
worth the effort. So I just save it up for Christmas.
Well, we'll send Thanksgiving thoughts your way, whether you're celebrating or
Thank
not.
you. I do miss it. I do miss Thanksgiving.
Well,
And Franny,
awesome.
say hi to your parents and grandparents for me.
I definitely will.
Okay.
All right. We'll see you guys next Monday.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving to the